when you're sharing work with executives, with leaders, with your boss, it is really important that you share it in a way that will make them care. If they care, they will engage more deeply. And when they engage more deeply, it will be much easier for you to move towards the outcomes that you are trying to move towards. We instead really want to get in a state of mind where we see being direct and telling people what we need as a productive way to serve those stakeholders.
Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik. And my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Jess. I'm a New York Times featured podcast host and a coach for women. I support professional women in building confidence, elevating into leadership roles, and developing a super effective communication style. And today's episode is all about the art of executive communication. When I was in my corporate career, executive communication was one of my absolute favorite things. I loved asking myself how I could make my slides and my content and my talking points more executive friendly. And I loved being able to refine and tweak and adjust the way that I shared information so that it would have a really big impact and so that it would create wow moments when I would share it with leaders and executives across the companies that I worked in back when I was in my corporate career. I love this topic so much, and it's one that's really worth delving into because when your communication becomes super powerful and super impressive, then people really start to view you as more of a leader. Our communication and the way we share our ideas is one of the most powerful tools that we have at our disposal to demonstrate our leadership potential to the leaders and executives at our company. And when you have that strong, crisp, powerful communication, they tend to see you as more of a leader, and it tends to work in your favor in terms of helping you advance upwards and elevate into leadership roles. And that is what I am all about, helping women advance upwards. In today's episode, I want to walk you through what executive communication is. What I find is sometimes people get a little bit too focused on the surface level tactics of executive communication and those surface level tweaks that you make to make your communication more executive friendly. For example, being more structured, being more clear, being more top down. I find though that a lot of times people get so focused on those surface level adjustments that they miss the bigger picture. And in today's episode, I wanted to talk about the bigger picture of why we are making those adjustments to our communication, because when you see the bigger picture, it will naturally be easier for you to understand how to improve the way that you are sharing information with executives. So this episode is a little bit of a 101 style episode where we're really talking about the foundations and the very fundamental definition of what executive communication is. And for me to teach this to you, I'm going to use a really simple idea that to me really captures the difference between plain old communication versus executive communication. And that idea is something that I think of as ball versus boomerang. When I say ball, I mean like basketball or baseball, right? Like a ball versus a boomerang. So I think most of us know the difference between a ball and a boomerang. When you throw a ball, you just throw it and it goes out into the ether and there it goes, right? It's not going to be coming back to you, unless someone throws it back to you. But when you throw a boomerang, the idea is the boomerang is going to spin outward and then eventually return back to you. Now, if you're throwing a ball and you know it's not going to come back to you, you don't really have to worry so much about your throw and how precise your throw is and whether you're throwing it hard enough. because whatever you do, regardless of how you throw that ball, it's not coming back to you, right? So that ball is just going wherever it's going. But if I'm throwing a boomerang and I know that I want it to come back to me, and I know that I want to be able to grab that boomerang on the way back, I have to be a little bit more thoughtful about how I throw it. I want to throw it in the proper way so that it actually returns back to me and so that I can catch it. So by nature of that exercise, I'm going to be a little more thoughtful and a little more careful about how I throw the boomerang, because I want to make sure that I can grab it. Versus if I'm just throwing the ball, I know it's not going to come back to me. I know it's going to disappear out into the ether, so I don't really care. This is the analogy that I think of when I think about regular communication versus executive communication. With regular, plain old communication, I think of that as being similar to throwing the ball. When I'm throwing the ball, I don't need it to come back to me. I don't expect it to come back to me. I don't worry about where it's going. I'm just throwing it and getting it out there. So similarly, when I'm just communicating in a regular old way, I'm not thinking so much about the impact of that communication. I'm not super worried about how precise it is or about how effective it is. I'm just putting it out there to get the information out, similar to the way I would just throw a ball and let it go and then be done with it. Executive communication, on the other hand, is much more like throwing a boomerang. When I'm communicating with a room full of executives, I have a very specific outcome that I want to create. Just like if I throw the boomerang, I have a very specific intention and outcome that I want, which is that the boomerang returns back to me. So when I'm communicating with executives, I'm not just going to throw my information out there the way I would just throw a ball out into the ether. I'm going to be much more careful, much more precise, much more thoughtful, because in this situation, it's not just about me putting out the information and me throwing the ball. It's about me throwing the boomerang out, putting the information out, and making sure that that boomerang returns back to me. Or in the case of speaking to executives, making sure that when I put out the information, the outcome that I desire comes back to me. So what executive communication is at its core is it's when we shift from just plain old communication to communication with intent to lead. So all executive communication is it's communication plus the intent to lead. And when I say intent to lead, what I mean is the intent to drive our audience towards a specific outcome. And again, if I'm communicating with the intent to lead, and if I'm communicating with the intent of driving my audience towards a specific outcome, I need to be very thoughtful about how I share the information with them, because I want to make sure that the way that I share it is going to help me lead them to that outcome. Just like if I'm throwing the boomerang, I want to be careful and thoughtful and precise and be sure that I'm throwing it in a way where it's actually going to come back to me in a way where I can catch it. So executive communication has a much heavier focus on the impact of our communication. It's a much bigger focus on what happens after we share the information. After we share it, did we get the response that we wanted? Did we make the decision that we wanted to make? Were we able to move forward in the way that we wanted to move forward? So it's taking it one step further and not just thinking about putting the information out there, but then thinking about what will happen after we do that and making sure that we are coming full circle and achieving the outcome that we desire. Now, of course, depending on your role and your company and the specific meeting that you're leading or taking part in, that goal is going to be different. So when I say communication with intent to lead, that can mean a lot of different things. You could be leading your audience to a lot of different places. But the fundamentals of what will help you lead and help you successfully throw that boomerang and have it come right back to you and successfully run that meeting and have it end in the exact way you wanted it to end What will help you do that are a few foundational principles that ensure that your communication is engaging your audience in the proper way to help you move towards an outcome. And in today's episode, I'm going to be sharing 3 really important foundational components that will help you make your communication less like throwing a ball and then the ball just goes wherever, and more like throwing a boomerang that comes back to you every single time. And by the way, it's so much fun when you develop this skill. Think about how satisfying it is to throw a boomerang, right? It's really fun to throw it and catch it and throw it and catch it. Like that would probably feel really good. Similarly, when you get good at executive communication, the conversations and interactions you have with executives become more satisfying because you know how to get the outcome. You know how to make things happen. You know how to move people towards the result. So you get that satisfaction and that closed loop of being able to show up and knowing how to shift the conversation towards a deliverable, towards an outcome, towards the thing you are trying to create. And ultimately, this is a huge part of what it means to be a leader. Being a leader means stepping beyond just the role of, I'm here to share information and I'm here to just throw some balls at the audience. And it means taking that additional responsibility of, I'm not just here to share information, I'm here to make things happen. I'm here to make sure that whatever it is we are talking about moves forward in a powerful way. I am taking responsibility not just for throwing this boomerang, but I'm also taking responsibility for throwing it in such a way where I know I'm going to be able to catch it when it comes back to me. So as you get good at this, your conversations become more productive, you have higher level conversations with executives, and it becomes a lot more fun. This was one of my favorite parts of my corporate career because I loved sinking my teeth into discussions with really experienced leaders. It was just so much fun to be able to get in there and share information with them and have a discussion that was really driving towards a powerful outcome or a powerful decision for the business. And so in today's episode, like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the 3 big things that will take your communication from just plain regular communication to executive communication, that will help you pivot from communicating to communicating with the intent to lead or with the intent to get people towards a specific outcome. Now, the best way to help you get really good at this is for you to understand the why behind it. So I'm definitely going to be walking you through the things that you want to be doing in your communication and these 3 important foundations. But I'm going to start by working backwards from why we are doing those things. Because I find that when we learn a skill, but we don't understand why we're doing the skill that we're doing, we can become really narrow and limited in our ability to apply that skill. Whereas when we understand the why and the deeper purpose behind it, we are then so much more effective in bringing that skill to life in a variety of different contexts and situations. So what I want to do is I want us to work backwards from the conditions that you want to create to ensure that when you are communicating, that communication is leading to an outcome. And so what we're going to explore is what has to be happening in the room and with my audience in order for me to move us towards an outcome, in order for that boomerang not just to get thrown, but to come back to me. And the first thing that we have to have in place if we want to be able to not just share information with our audience, but also move something forward. That could mean making a decision. That could mean approving something, right? Whatever it looks like in your specific situation. But in order for me to go beyond sharing the information and actually move my work forward, one of the most important foundational things that has to be in place is my audience has to care. They have to care about the topic that I'm sharing. They have to care about the discussion. If they don't care, it is going to be very hard for me to lead them somewhere. Because leading your audience somewhere, whether you're leading them to a decision, to an approval, to kicking off a new project, like whatever it is, if you want to lead them there, they have to be willing to follow you. So you can't just lead in a vacuum. Your audience has to have genuine desire to be part of this process. So this means that when you're sharing work with executives, with leaders, with your boss, it is really important that you share it in a way that will make them care. If they care, they will engage more deeply. And when they engage more deeply, it will be much easier for you to move towards the outcomes that you are trying to move towards. Okay, so this brings us to the question of how do we get our audience to care? And this is where we get to the first really important adjustment that you will want to make to your communication to make it more executive friendly, is that when you're sharing things, you have to be talking not just about the things that you're sharing, but you have to be talking about the benefits and the value that is created by those things. You have to talk about all of the positive impacts that flow from the information that you're sharing, because when your executive audience sees that, they will get excited about your work and they will care more deeply and they will engage more deeply. So here's what I mean when I say talking about the benefits and talking about the value that you're creating. There's a really big difference between saying, I'm going to walk you through our marketing plan versus saying, I'm going to walk you through our marketing plan. It is going to help us meet next quarter's sales targets. This is a seemingly subtle change, and it might not seem like a big shift, but there's a really important difference because the executive's mind is busy and cluttered with information. When they hear marketing plan, for a lot of executives, it could sound like just more noise, more things they have to take in, more information they have to digest. But when they hear how that feeds into the bigger goals for the business, suddenly that marketing plan is going to become more compelling to them. And it's really important that when you're sharing information, you are pausing to ask yourself, why is this compelling? And as you are walking them through your update, or your presentation, you want to be weaving in talking points about how this work is driving positive results and benefits for your company. This is especially important at the very beginning because when you're sharing information and kicking off your meeting, your audience is deciding how much they want to tune in versus tune out, right? And like we all do this. When we get into a meeting, we think like, oh, do I have to actually pay attention? And your executive audience is doing that too. They're human too, just like you are, and they have a finite attention span. And so you want to be especially thoughtful about how you introduce topics and about how you introduce information, because you don't want them to make that decision to tune out right at the beginning. But then even as you're getting deeper into the discussion with them, you want to make sure that you're periodically zooming out and not just looking at the trees, but looking at the forest and asking yourself, what is the bigger picture benefit or implication of this slide or of this piece of information that I'm sharing? Every time you highlight one of those benefits, your audience is going to be more interested, more excited, and more engaged. And when they're more interested, excited, and engaged, it's going to be easier for you to drive them towards an outcome and to create the result that you want to create in that interaction. So that is the first condition that you need in place in order to make sure that your communication is impactful and driving towards an outcome, which is your audience has to care, and you're going to help them care and get excited and invested by highlighting all of the business benefits that flow from the work and ideas that you're sharing. Okay, the second thing that has to be in place in order for you to not just communicate, but communicate in a way that leads to outcomes and in a way that gets results in the room when you are having the conversation, is your audience has to understand what it is you are sharing. Now, this sounds really obvious, but something that is so important to share is that simplifying things and making things easy to understand is really, really hard work. Sometimes we see simple things and we think, oh, that must have been easy for them to explain simply because it sounded so simple. But getting complex things to feel simple is actually quite difficult. And what most people do is they have complicated ideas and they have information that has all sorts of parts and dimensions to it, and they just share it with their audience as is. They don't slow down to simplify it and to streamline it. And the problem is when you don't slow down and ask yourself, how can I make this stupid simple for my audience to understand? What happens is you put information in front of them or you share an idea with them. And then instead of engaging with the idea and instead of them thinking, do I like this idea? Do I not like this idea? They're thinking, what is this idea? What is this? Their brain is stuck on the question of what is she showing me or what is she saying? And so it can't engage with the question of how do I feel about this proposal? So you lose that opportunity to have a deeper discussion because your audience is focused on making sense of the information. You want to make sure that you've done all that heavy lifting and that you've made the effort to make sense of the information on their behalf and that you are spoon feeding it to them in a way that's so easy and so intuitive that they're not going to spend an ounce of brain space trying to understand what you are sharing. Instead, they can focus all of their brain space on talking about the implications of what you are sharing. They understand the idea, and so then you and them can focus the conversation on what y'all want to do about that idea. The way that you know if information is simple enough or not is if the pace of a conversation or meeting is getting snagged because people are asking questions or people are not understanding. Now, of course, asking questions, there's nothing wrong with that. You should ask questions when you don't understand something. But when you are sharing information with an audience, you want to set a goal of them not having a ton of clarifying questions. You want your information to be as clear as possible so that instead of them getting stuck on clarifying, you can move into the deeper discussion. So if you're getting a lot of questions about the foundations of what you're sharing, the fundamentals of what you're sharing, that's a sign that you want to slow down and simplify more. It's better if your audience just understands the information so that the discussion that you have with them isn't about clarifying what it is, but actually about what it means and how to move forward. So that is the second fundamental. Your audience has to understand what you are sharing. And in order for them to understand, you have to keep things really simple. Keeping things simple is a lot of mental work. It's mental work that most people don't want to do. However, it's mental work that will help you stand out and help you facilitate higher level conversations. Okay, now the last condition that has to be present in the room in order for you to not simply communicate information, but communicate in a way that gets you and your audience to an outcome is that you have to lead them to an outcome. This is so important, and sometimes this can feel really challenging to do, but it's a pivotal skill that you will want to develop to really help you take your corporate career to the next level. When I say that you have to be willing to take them to an outcome, what I mean is that you have to feel full ownership of getting whatever result it is you are wanting to get from that meeting or that interaction or that conversation. Just like the example I gave earlier, if you throw a ball and you're not worried at all about catching it because you know it's not going to come back to you, you're just going to throw it willy-nilly. But if you're throwing a boomerang and you know it's going to come back to you and you know you want to catch it, you have to be ready. You have to pay attention, right? You can't start checking your phone and scrolling Instagram because what if the boomerang comes back and you miss it? You have to be there, ready, devoted, committed to catching that boomerang. Similarly, if you want to elevate the quality of your communication and really embrace the art of executive communication, then you have to take on the role of the leader. This means that when you're addressing your audience and when you're talking to your boss and when you're sharing things with people, you are very clear, very direct, very assertive with them about what you need and why they're there. And this assertiveness is not just at the beginning of the meeting where you let them know the purpose and you set expectations in terms of what you need from them, But throughout the meeting, when you need them to give input, you have to prompt them to give input. When you need the room to make a decision, you have to be the one to lead the process of making that decision. This can feel scary, and I think this can especially feel scary for us as women because this is a form of taking up a ton of space for us to come in and say, listen, here's what I need from you, or listen, like this is the discussion that I want us to be having right now. I think a lot of us have been socialized to not be too forward, right? Like, don't ask for too much, don't be too bitchy. And so then when it comes time to step into the shoes of leadership and really direct and lead our audience somewhere, we have a tendency to lean back. And we have a tendency to avoid that assertive language and avoid using phrases that are more directive. The problem is, if we're not doing those things, our audience doesn't know. They don't know that we need a decision from them. They don't know that we have to discuss this topic together. They don't know that we need to leave the meeting with approval. If you aren't the engine driving them towards that decision, they're not going to move towards it on their own. So it's really, really important that you get really clear both on the macro of, okay, from this interaction that I'm having, what is it that I want from my stakeholders, and the micro. As I'm showing them slide number 2 and as I'm showing them slide number 7, what do I need from them? What do I want from them? What is the discussion that we need to be having? As you do this more, your audience will see you as more of an authority. And I know that it can feel scary, and I know that it can feel like maybe you're being too forward, or maybe people will see you as pushing them around. But you have to remember that giving people clear guidance and clear direction is an act of service for your stakeholders. I really want you to think about a super crowded coffee shop. That's a great example. A super crowded coffee shop where there's no structure for the line. People are just clamoring to get to the cash register and order coffee, but there's no structured line that you can wait in to get your coffee. It's totally disorganized, right? Versus a coffee shop that has those little lanes, you know, the lanes that you are walking through, like when you're waiting in line for a ride at Disneyland or Six Flags and you go back and forth, versus a coffee shop that has that. When those lanes are in place, it makes things less stressful for people. People know where to go. They know there's a sense of direction. They know there's a sense of order. When you're being direct, when you're leading your audience to an outcome, when you're telling them what it is you need from them, they are going to have a better experience because you're creating order. And sometimes when we're not being direct and assertive, it can really feel like we're in that chaotic coffee shop where there's no structure to the line and there's hordes of people everywhere. So it's really important, I think, especially for us as women, to really try to unwind any association that we have that being direct is bad and we're taking up too much space and we're being too forward. And we instead really want to get in a state of mind where we see being direct and telling people what we need as a productive way to serve those stakeholders. I don't think anyone's ever gotten in line, for a ride or at a coffee shop and been like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this coffee shop has the audacity to put up these little poles and these little guardrails for us to stand in line. How rude, how disrespectful, right? No, we just see it as something that's there to guide us. And it's so important that over time, you start to reframe your understanding and your thoughts about being direct to see it as a tool, a valuable tool that is useful for you and useful for your audience. And the truth is, it is useful for your audience. If you've ever been in a disorganized meeting, you know that it doesn't feel good to sit there and not know what you're supposed to do. So, in summary, the biggest difference between regular communication and executive communication is communication with the intent of creating a very specific outcome based on the conversation you are having with your executive stakeholders. Just like you'd throw a boomerang with the intent to catch it, with executive communication, you're putting your communication out there just like throwing a boomerang, with the intent of it achieving a specific outcome. And in order for this to happen, 3 things have to be present in the room. 1, your audience has to care. 2, your audience has to understand what you're sharing. And 3, you have to be leading your audience somewhere. When your communication accomplishes these 3 things, your conversations and meetings will be more productive, your audience will be more interactive and engaged, and your impact will go up. It will support the work that you do, and it will help you grow your reputation as a leader. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. And if you found this useful, there are a couple ways that you can get even better at executive communication. First of all, I have a free video course called Speak Like a CEO. Speak Like a CEO walks you through foundational tactics that you can apply to make your communication more executive friendly. It is a video course. It is totally free, and you can grab it by getting access to my free resource library. I will link the free resource library in the show notes. This is where you will find not only that free course, but tons of other free ebooks, workbooks, and audio trainings. Like I said, I will link that in the show notes, or head over to jessguzikcoaching.com/free resources. And if you want an even deeper dive on your executive communication skills, and you want the chance to delve into these foundations, to learn them, to apply them, to practice them, and to get really good at them, I invite you to add yourself to the waitlist for my group program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. This is my signature group program where I support you in learning the fundamental skills that will elevate your verbal communication. And I also help you build confidence so that you feel solid inside, which is going to help you make a much more powerful impression on the outside when you speak. To be the first to find out when I open the next cohort of the Art of Speaking Up Academy, add yourself to the waitlist by heading over to jessguzikcoaching.com/academy, and I will link it in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening until the very end, and I will catch you in next week's episode. Bye.